In this video, I want to talk about 5 negative trends inside of the tech world. But don't leave too quickly. It's not just going to be about gear and gadgets, even though I do have some specific recommendations for things that you should buy. No, this video is going to be a little bit broader than that, because these trends go beyond just electronical consumer goods and into the way that people think about culture and even government in general. So the first trend that I want to talk about here in this video is centralization. This is obviously one that applies to both individual consumer electronics and governments, pulling more services, more authority, more control under one roof or one umbrella. Now, this isn't necessarily always entirely negative. There are reasons in the technology space to centralize stuff. There's a tremendous advantage to stuff being centralized. If your telephone capability was entirely decentralized, it would be very hard to actually troubleshoot problems, fix problems, etc. You would have to do more of that yourself. And while I think you should do a little bit more of that, there is value in a large telecom company centralizing things so that you can actually talk to people in other states. And in the software world, there are actual values to be had in centralization. The TREX Arms Range Day app is a great example of this. We could have made an app that lives entirely on your phone and never talks to any servers. But if that were the case, you never would be able to get new drills, which is something that we've continually added, and you would never be able to get drills from your friends, which is something that we are going to add. And you also never would be able to back up your drills and your times and get those if you lost your phone, which is another thing that is probably going to happen. But overall, I would say that generally in the tech world, there is too much emphasis on centralization. There are products that should be able to work offline, like the Range Day app, and only talk to the server when they absolutely need to. They should be capable to do things on their own, but they just refuse to function unless they can talk to a centralized server. There are games that do this as an anti-piracy measure. There are devices that are very capable of doing things on their own, but they just flat out won't work without the connection for a subscription purpose. This software as a service trend inside of tech has been much talked about. There is great value to it, but then there are significant downsides.
If we plant a virus into that mothership, it's going to then filter down into all the corresponding ships below.
Perfect example of this would probably be the Adobe suite. Adobe has owned all kinds of graphic design market share in the past, and you used to be able to just buy Adobe Premiere or Adobe After Effects or some combo of these things in the Adobe Creative Suite on a piece of physical media, and you owned it and it just worked. And then a year or two later, they'd come out with a new one, and you could decide whether or not you wanted to buy that one or keep using the previous version. Well, that's not really an option anymore. Now you pretty much have to subscribe to the thing and pay the monthly fee, and there's been some shenanigans about how you even cancel that if you can, but it is for the purpose of subscription that you are dependent upon these Adobe servers, which is great in some ways. You get up-to-date services, your plugins generally work pretty well, stuff like that is kind of neat, your preferences can sync to the cloud, but if you are, say, in a remote place where you don't have internet, you're not going to have your software capabilities that you paid for that month. And then last week, or the week before, depending on when this episode drops, Garmin added something that it never added before, which was a new app called Connect Plus, which gives you new features, which cost $6 a month. Now, we at TREX are fans of Garmin. Garmin is one of the tech companies that has resisted most of these 5 trends for the longest. And I would say that this Connect Plus feature kind of remains to be seen how it's going to be used. There are a lot of people who are immediately dissatisfied with it because when you buy a multi-$100 watch, you want it to function without paying a monthly subscription. And the good news is that is the case. The watch does keep working. And the original Connect app also keeps working. And the Connect Plus app just adds you new features. New features that, by the way, run on pretty complicated servers. They require AI. So that costs Garmin some money to run. So them passing those costs down to the user kind of makes sense. But it is a trend that has been negative from other tech companies. So people are paying a little bit of attention to it. Apple, for example, has a fantastic set of scuba diving features inside of their most expensive Apple Watch, but you cannot use them beyond snorkel mode unless you pay $10 a month to have access to the features that are literally built into the watch, or software that is literally running on the phone. So yeah, the trend often goes the other way. And we see this even in commercial and industrial softwares as well. So Fusion 360 is the CAD program that we use for both CAD and CAM here at TREX Arms. That lives in the cloud. That is a subscription-based thing. But you have to ask a question at this point. If the owner of the software, the user of the software, can't use the software when he wants to, if he can't use the hardware when he wants to, then technically he doesn't own it. He stops being an owner and he becomes a mere user. Again, occasionally there are pieces of software or hardware where that makes sense. The literal function of the device requires some centralized cell phone towers or switching apparatus, and so we're okay with it. But a lot of times we're seeing devices where the brains and the software are totally capable of working without the server, and it just kind of gets nerfed, which means the user is no longer an owner and he's no longer in control. Now this is probably a little bit of a longer running trend where users or owners lose more and more control over their basic devices, even if it doesn't depend on some centralized server to necessarily do it. And this is probably best demonstrated as Android has developed over time. Now in theory, Android is not necessarily the most user-friendly, but is the most user-flexible of the mobile operating systems. It is open source, and there are more people making phones that have more options. But over time, the operating system has removed a lot of controls. There used to be an amazing app. It still exists, but it does fewer things, called Tasker. And I ran that on my Android phone and set up a bunch of rules for radios so that when I left my Wi-Fi, if the phone could not reconnect to Wi-Fi, the Wi-Fi would turn off, saving me battery and also some RF emissions. And I had similar rules set up for Bluetooth devices and other things. I controlled when those radios turned on and off, and Tasker let me set rules that would do that. And there were some other really handy things you could do too, like before Do Not Disturb was a thing in the operating system. You could set up rules for when the ringer was active, when the vibration thing turned on. Like, you could control your entire phone using Tasker, and you could automate all of this stuff, and it was cool. And now you can still buy Tasker. It still does some stuff, but almost all of the powerful controls that it had over the operating system are gone. The operating system has taken over most of, even those most basic decisions. So this new Samsung phone from 3 years ago, it decides when the radios should be on or off.
This is your tracking device.
I can manually turn them off, but I don't trust that they're actually off. So what ends up happening is this device is basically running itself. I no longer essentially run it. I like my devices that I own. I mean, I have the expectation that they will do what I want, but Google and Apple assume that they can determine what I will want. And this kind of comes back into a security versus convenience conversation that we've had about encryption and various sort of OPSEC considerations, but this is true of all kinds of automation. The most control is when I control literally everything, which is not really possible on modern devices. The most convenience is when I control nothing. They're kind of opposite ends of the scale, and you decide what it is that you actually want. And ideally, you would have the ability to pick exactly where in between these two extremes you would like to be. For example, when automatic transmissions were new, there were a lot of drivers who could get better gas mileage with a manual transmission. Well, automatic transmissions have gotten better, and as I've gotten busier and am doing more things with more kids and more devices, which I never use in the car, by the way, I'm actually really good with automatic transmissions now. I only miss manual just for the fun of driving. But automatic driving cars, automatic decisions that your car is making for you across more than just the transmission is kind of an interesting thing. It gets trickier and you're handing over more of those things. And once again, are you really owning the device if you can't control it? Are you just a user or just kind of a passenger? The other way that you can lose control or capability of your own devices, which you can physically hold in your hands and have paid for with your actual own money, is a move away from open standards to more proprietary stuff, protocols, connections, things like that. And sometimes, like centralized servers, this is necessary. These are the Even Realities G1 smart glasses, and they have really cool heads-up displays in here, and they talk over Bluetooth to my phone. But there isn't a great protocol for this brand new thing, so they have no choice but to develop their own. On the other hand, we have over here the Meta Ray-Bans, and they also use Bluetooth and Wi-Fi to do stuff, and they do stuff really, really well. When I do stuff over Bluetooth, it sounds great. When I take pictures with the camera over in this side, they look fine, I guess. The video is okay for social media purposes. But when it comes to software, this thing is really locked down. I will say, I love this hardware so much. I now wish that I'd bought the clear, transparent ones so that I could see all of the stuff really nicely packed in here. From a hardware perspective, no notes. This thing is phenomenal. Well, I maybe would put the camera on the other side because I have to shoot with my left eye if I want the sights to kind of sort of line up with the actual camera. But the actual tasks that this thing helps me with here, those are pretty limited by software. I'm limited to a bunch of proprietary services, even though it has standard Bluetooth microphones and speakers in here, and I can use those for phone calls. I can't really use those with other apps because Meta really wants to lock me into their proprietary stuff. So I cannot send messages through any messaging apps except for the ones that Meta owns. So yeah, Facebook Messenger and the other one, that's it. There's a ton of stuff that I could do media-wise through these things, but they only want me to listen to stuff through their media platforms. And even some of the hardware restrictions that I thought were in there, this super tiny, super lightweight device used to only shoot 60 seconds of video. But as soon as Instagram changed their reel length to 3 minutes, suddenly magically it could shoot 3 minutes of video. So a lot of built-in artificial restrictions based on proprietary controls instead of on the other ones. And then even though this has regular Bluetooth, they really want you to use it with a phone that has a bunch of Meta stuff installed. So even just pairing these things as if they were regular Bluetooth earbuds to a computer is really tricky and hard to do. You're much better off just with regular Bluetooth earbuds for some of this stuff. So I recommend that you guys go check out the JLab Minis. They're about 30 bucks. They're mostly waterproof. They're incredibly tiny. They're ambidextrous. You can put them in either ear. They have all of the features, and they're in a tiny, tiny case. And there's nothing proprietary about them at all. JLab is not building their own proprietary system, so they just work with anything. You can connect them to phones. You can connect them to computers. You can connect them to Bluetooth-enabled radios, which are becoming more and more standard. And they're small enough that they fit underneath EarPro. Yeah, these have been phenomenal. Now, the downside is they only do the most basic Bluetooth stuff. Occasionally, you will find developers who figure out a way to sort of do both. These are the Samsung Galaxy Buds, I forget which ones, and these kind of split the difference. They work like regular earbuds. They do all the regular earbud stuff, but if you do connect the Galaxy Buds to a Galaxy phone and you run the Samsung software, you get a few extra perks. There are a couple of bits of hardware in here that go beyond what regular Bluetooth can do, and then there's bits of hardware in here so that you can do better quality, lower latency than standard Bluetooth and some fancy stuff like that. But you end up with complete backwards compatibility with these to any other Bluetooth device. I appreciate that because it's getting rarer and rarer all the time. Giving people more standards that devices work with will give them more options. I don't feel like I truly own these glasses because I can't use them how I want. I am a user of the glasses when they do the things that the glasses want to do. I can't listen to my own podcast app or my own, I can't even mention which YouTube app I use to watch YouTube videos because YouTube doesn't like alternatives. But these glasses don't talk to them. Even the things that don't rely on that centralized server, I can't quite do. So, do I really own these glasses? Kind of feels like I don't. Now, the last three things that we talked about, we're going to talk about 5, but the first 3 that we just discussed, those have a purpose beyond just trends that people are blindly following. They kind of guide people into these walled gardens. There are very deliberate trends that benefit the parent companies if they are able to pull enough people into this kind of walled garden business model. JLabs is not big enough to develop that. They need to sell these Bluetooth earbuds purely on their own merits. But Samsung has some extra capabilities that they benefit from if I use all of their own stuff. And Apple is, of course, a perfect example of this. I'm still annoyed. I'm still annoyed that they both switched away from regular headphone jack.
Well, the reason to move on, I'm going to give you 3 of them, but it really comes down to one word: courage.
Apple and Samsung were only brave enough to switch users away from that 3.5 millimeter headphone jack after they had each purchased a very large and successful Bluetooth headphone company. So, yeah, once you get enough people using the Apple Watch and the Apple phone and the Apple computers and the Apple platforms all together, you can do things like collect 30% of every app purchase on the iOS App Store. So the walled gardens are really, really lucrative for different companies. And so centralizing and removing control and adding proprietary restraints, those kind of make sense. But the other 2 trends that I want to talk about are a little more, I think, accidental. They're sort of a path of least resistance thing. They're done more out of laziness than anything else. Over time, computers have gotten more powerful, which means there's more power available for certain tasks. And the assumption is that you need to upgrade more often. This is the first Galaxy S phone, by the way. First of all, look at how tiny phones were. But this phone has not only a headphone jack, but it has a removable back. And inside here, you can add micro SD, expandable storage, replaceable battery, and even a little jack where you can plug in an external antenna when you're in places like Middle Tennessee with poor cell phone coverage. Newer, better phones have none of these super handy features. This telephone right here is still very cool, and because it has removable batteries, I could get batteries that still power this thing. But it doesn't talk to a lot of the newer cell phone towers, and it doesn't run any of the newer apps. So I gotta upgrade more often, and I gotta use more power all the time. This is a Samsung S22 Ultra, so it's already like 3 years old, but it has 6 gigabytes of RAM, a ton of storage, and an unbelievable amount of processing power to do, well, I mostly use it for checking email and writing tweets. But I want you to cast your mind back to 1993, just over 30 years ago, when Jurassic Park came out. Feast your eyes on these amazing computer graphics. And remember that these were done on either an SGI Indigo or SGI Onyx device. I forget exactly which computers were used for which parts of this thing, but we're talking about really powerful desktop workstations capable of anywhere between 100 and 150 megahertz of blistering fast CPU horsepower, and up to, not more than, but up to 96 megabytes of RAM. Even to this day, I think these are some of the best computer animated creatures that you will ever find. And they were using computers that have less computational power than this smartwatch. Now, To be fair to the CGI industry, today's graphics are getting more complex computationally as the computers get faster. I don't know that they're necessarily wasting energy on these ridiculously complex simulations for fluids and stuff like that. But most of us aren't making inexplicably long Avatar sequels. Actually, Avatar sequels by themselves are kind of inexplicable. Most of us are doing basic email and word processing, which technically isn't that much more complicated than it was in the 90s, and we were doing that on computers that had way less power than 150 megahertz and way less RAM than 96 megabytes. But because we have all this power, even basic tasks have expanded to fill up almost the entire thing. And the way that we solve problems and build programs and things like that just build on top of these taller and taller tech stacks of existing frameworks and services. So there are a lot of really basic apps that end up not being basic in terms of how much power they take to run, because you are running all of Android, and then you are running all of the Google Play services on top, and then you are running probably a full Chrome browser tab, and then you are running a really tiny JavaScript app inside. All that stuff has to run to do really basic stuff. Now, there are reasons to do it this way. A great example of this would be another movie, kind of more recent one. When Christopher Nolan made Oppenheimer, he wanted everybody to watch it on IMAX because he's that kind of guy, and it was a very long movie that took a whole bunch of IMAX reels. Now, in the past, the big IMAX projectors were controlled using an app that ran on Palm Pilot, something that was inferior even to this first Galaxy phone right here, and a little bit hard to source. So when they dug all these old IMAX projectors out of storage so people could watch Oppenheimer the way that it was meant to, they needed a new reel switching computer. And they built a full Palm Pilot emulator that ran inside of a browser on an Android phone. That's actually a great fast problem-solving solution for a really cheap rollout for one movie release. It's not a dependable long-term solution, so it works great. I'm glad that they didn't build new hardware-based Palm Pilots from scratch just to take a swing at winning an Oscar. This was the right solution for that one tiny one-off problem. But for most of us, we would like something a little bit less whacked together, a little bit less kludgy, a little bit less technologically complicated, something a bit more simple. And I can see in the future this trend just kind of getting worse. Right now, AI is really interesting. It's a new frontier. It's fascinating, but I also see people using really big, powerful computers and really sophisticated AI programs to do really simple problems, like play Pac-Man. Pac-Man used to be played on something that had less computational power than a basic calculator. And now, thousands of watts of power can go into making Pac-Man from scratch inside of AI. This brute force thing is very interesting and it's cool, but it's wasteful, and it does have some significant other weaknesses. The more stuff you have running on these devices, no matter how powerful they are, the more fragile they become. If you have stacks and stacks of operating systems and libraries and frameworks and drivers, you are going to have a bunch of dependencies. There's a famous XKCD comic that describes this, showing how the whole internet is basically dependent on and thus propped up by little tiny software projects that end up making the entire thing very brittle and more rigid than people think. Sometimes the rigidity and the threat comes from stagnant old projects filled with old bugs and exploits that people find out about later, like Heartbleed. Sometimes it's something else. Like last year, Microsoft had major shutdowns of their operating systems because they had certain systems that were utterly dependent on CrowdStrike, which was a security tool. And when CrowdStrike failed, all of those Microsoft computers failed, and some of them shut down, well, basically the entire airline industry for days. Which means sometimes when you rely on all these other frameworks that you don't own or don't control, means that you are getting new features that you didn't want. You're forced into upgrading because the old ones are obsolete, and you end up without the backward compatibility. That would have been a nice middle ground. Let me give you an example of that. There are some folks out there that have been using our Range Day app on really, really old phones, and it doesn't function flawlessly on the really, really old phones. And the reason for that is, not trying to blame shift, but it is literally impossible to write software, a single piece of software that functions flawlessly across new and old. The standards and the expectations and the frameworks and the libraries and all of these things are just not there. We would need to have different versions of the software for these things. So as much as I admire and appreciate guys that have kept old hardware running for a very long time, that's extremely practical of you guys. The software services are kind of letting you down. If we do want to comply with modern specs and standards, which is kind of a thing that you need to do if you're releasing your app on these app stores and they're running on phones that need to connect to cell phone towers, at some point there just is no backwards compatibility. As much as I like this original Galaxy S from Samsung, there is no way to keep this thing running as a phone. As a device that runs early 2010, I believe, ROMs from XDA developers, yes, but as a phone that actually lets me do stuff inside of Android, no. Now, in some ways, I think it's obvious that people would like to have things, whether they be products or services or companies or countries, that are less fragile. But these trends are pretty universal across those things. Very centralized institutions that have taken control away from people and locked things into proprietary special systems or protocols or expectations, as opposed to open, easily accessible standards, and then building taller and taller rigid technology stacks that are kind of brittle and fragile. I think we need to go the other direction, and I think that that is true for basically everybody. Whether you are looking to buy technology, you're wanting to compare two different devices and decide between the one that is more open source and one that is more proprietary, my recommendation is to go with something that you have more control and ultimately ownership over. If you are developing technology and you have a bunch of different stuff that you want to do with it, my recommendation would be that you lean more into something that can be fully embraced and fully used by your users. Make them more than users, make them actual owners. And then as you're building out a company or even a country, making sure that your customers can be a part of the thing, or making sure that your citizens actually own the thing instead of just being users, controlled in a more top-down, centralized way, is, I think, very important. Around the world, there is this expectation of not just technology companies sort of shrinking the agency of the customer into a mere user, and it goes beyond this. I think globally, we can see that countries over the last few centuries have leaned more into these trends even than big tech has. This assumption that the citizens of a nation are no longer active participants with ownership in a nation. They are mere users or kind of second-rate customers. That's a pretty universal assumption of a lot of people building state infrastructure and bureaucratic stuff right now. So these 5 trends are things that I think we need to get away from pretty much across the board. Now, if this topic interests you on a philosophical level, I recommend that you check out the TREX Talk podcast, which I'll link to somewhere over here. We have tons of episodes where we get into this a little bit more. And if you were interested at this topic more on the technical level and would like to have more ownership over specific electronic devices, I also recommend that you visit the TREX Talk podcast. The most recent episode that you can find there is going to be a conversation between me and the guy that runs Mark 7, which makes de-Googled phones easier for you to use and provides other privacy and security solutions in this particular space. And I'm not actually sure whether we're going to agree on everything that I just talked about in this video. You're going to have to go check that conversation and see how it goes, because at this point I haven't actually recorded it yet.